The family curse, the mystery of the disappearing boys. When the ultrasound showed I was having a boy, my mother turned as white as a ghost. The doctor was congratulating us on our healthy baby, pointing out tiny hands and feet on the screen. But Mom sat frozen, gripping the chair's armrests until her knuckles went white. Then she stood up and walked out without saying a word. I found her in the hospital parking lot, sitting in her car and crying like I'd never seen her cry before, inconsolably, desperately, as if she was mourning someone's death. When I got in beside her and asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and started the engine. The whole drive home, there was this heavy silence between us that scared me more than any words could have. At home, Mom locked herself in her bedroom and didn't come out until evening. I told my husband David about her strange reaction, but he just shrugged, figuring Mom was tired or stressed about work. But I remembered how differently she'd reacted 4 years ago when we were expecting Emma. When we found out it was a girl, Mom practically glowed with happiness, immediately started buying pink things and making plans. Now the news about having a grandson had triggered a reaction like she'd been given a terminal diagnosis. For the next few days, Mom avoided talking about the pregnancy. When I showed her new ultrasound pictures or told her how active the baby was, she'd nod and quickly change the subject. Several times I caught her looking at me with this desperation in her eyes, like she wanted to tell me something, but couldn't bring herself to do it. A week later, Mom tried to start a conversation. She began saying something about family traditions, about how not all children are born the same, but then suddenly stopped and said I'd have to figure it all out for myself when the time came. These cryptic phrases only made my anxiety worse. At 30, I thought I was a grown woman who knew her family better than anyone. But Mom's behavior was making me reconsider everything I thought I knew about our history. I started remembering strange moments from childhood, how Mom would abruptly end conversations when I asked about relatives, how she avoided family gatherings on Grandma's side, how she'd get nervous if she saw children with developmental disabilities. Mom had an older brother named Martin, who was almost never talked about. I only knew he existed from fragments of conversations with Grandma, but Mom would always change the subject if Uncle Martin came up. Officially, he died in childhood from some illness, but something about that story always seemed off to me. Sometimes Grandma would talk about him in the present tense, then catch herself and go quiet. That's when I remembered my first pregnancy. Mom had been nervous right up until the ultrasound, but when she learned it was a girl, she bloomed with relief. I hadn't thought much of it then, chalking it up to normal grandmother excitement, but now her reaction took on a sinister meaning. The truth came unexpectedly. 3 weeks after that fateful news, Mom couldn't take it anymore. She came to my house late one evening when David was putting Emma to bed, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands were shaking. She sat down beside me on the couch and took my hands in her ice-cold palms. Mom told me the truth that our family had been hiding for 4 generations. All the boys born to women in our bloodline had been born with a severe condition that made life in the family impossible. They couldn't speak, had uncontrollable episodes, hurt themselves, didn't understand boundaries. Each generation of women in our family had faced this nightmare and made the same terrible decision. The story began with my great-great-grandmother in the 1920s. She lived on a farm in rural Ohio, raising 6 children. 4 of them were healthy girls, but 2 boys were born with severe disabilities. The older boy seemed like a normal baby, but by 18 months it became clear something was wrong. He didn't respond to his parents' voices, didn't reach for toys, could sit motionless for hours, staring at one spot. When they tried to feed or change him, he'd go into a strange stupor, becoming wooden-like. The younger brother was the complete opposite, hyperactive and unmanageable. He didn't sleep at night, made piercing sounds that scared the farm animals. By age 2, he became dangerous, could suddenly bite or hit, broke everything he could get his hands on. You couldn't leave him alone for even a minute. In those days, rural folks explained such things as God's punishment or dark forces at work. The local midwife whispered about a curse that had fallen on the family for unknown sins. Neighboring farmers started avoiding my great-great-grandmother, fearing the curse might spread to their children. A local church pastor declared the sick boys marked by the devil and demanded the family get rid of them to save their souls and the souls of other parishioners. The community pressure became unbearable. People stopped buying produce from their farm. Children wouldn't play with their daughters. My great-great-grandmother was a deeply religious woman and couldn't go against the pastor's words. Plus, caring for the sick sons was destroying the family. The older daughters couldn't go to school because they constantly had to watch the brothers. The farm was falling apart because all their energy went into controlling 2 unmanageable children. In 1923, when the older boy was 4 and the younger was 3, my great-great-grandmother learned about an asylum for defective children in the neighboring county. It was the only way to save the rest of the family from complete ruin and exile from the community. The decision was incredibly difficult, but there was no choice. She took both boys to the asylum, where conditions were horrifying even by the standards of that time. The children died within a year, not from abuse, but simply from diseases that flourished in the overcrowded, unsanitary facilities. My great-grandmother, born in 1920, grew up remembering this tragedy. She was one of the healthy daughters and lived her whole youth in fear of the family curse repeating. When she married in the 1940s, she prayed to only have girls. First came 2 healthy daughters, and my great-grandmother began hoping the nightmare was behind them. But in 1945, when she was 25, a son was born. The war had just ended. Her husband had returned from the front, and the birth of an heir should have been a celebration. At first the boy seemed normal, but by his first birthday, troubling signs appeared. He was unusually calm, didn't cry, didn't laugh, didn't react to his parents. It seemed like he lived in his own world, inaccessible to those around him. By age 2, it was clear history was repeating. The boy didn't speak, didn't play, could sit in a corner for hours, monotonously rocking. If they tried to distract him or make him do something against his will, he'd go into a stupor, stop moving, not respond to anything. In post-war 1940s America, attitudes towards such children were different from the 1920s. Society had become more civilized, but not more understanding. Doctors gave vague diagnoses like congenital mental retardation or childhood schizophrenia, but offered no treatment. My great-grandmother was ashamed to be seen in public with her son. In those days, having a defective child was considered shameful for the family, a sign of bad heredity. Neighbors whispered behind her back. Some openly advised putting the boy in an institution for his own good. By age 5, the situation had become unbearable. The boy required constant supervision, but remained completely unresponsive to everything happening around him. He didn't react to love, didn't respond to care as if he lived in a parallel reality. In 1948, my great-grandmother decided to place her son in a state institution for children with developmental disorders. Post-war America was building new facilities that promised a scientific approach to treating such children. In reality, these were places of isolation, where children were simply kept away from society. My grandmother was born in 1940 and witnessed this family drama. She saw how her mother suffered, how the healthy sisters suffered, how the family slowly crumbled under the weight of shame and despair. When it came time to marry, she swore she'd never let this tragedy repeat. But in 1962, when Grandma was 22, a son was born, Uncle Martin. By then, it was the swinging 60s, an era of optimism and faith in science. It seemed modern medicine should find solutions to any problems. Martin was born right in the middle of the baby boom, when having a son was considered a special blessing. For the first months, he developed normally, and Grandma hoped the family curse was finally broken. But by 18 months, problems began. Martin was an active child, but his activity was chaotic and destructive. He didn't play with toys, he broke them. Didn't hug his parents, he pushed them away. Didn't explore the world, he destroyed everything around him. By age 2, his behavior became truly frightening. Martin could suddenly fly into a rage, screaming and attacking everything in sight. He didn't understand the word no, didn't respond to punishment or rewards. It seemed like he lived by his own incomprehensible rules. In the early 1960s, psychiatry was going through a revolution. Doctors were first beginning to talk about childhood autism, but knowledge was extremely limited. Martin was diagnosed with early dementia and offered intensive therapy at a specialized clinic. But the biggest problem wasn't the diagnosis. It was how people reacted. The family lived in the suburbs, where everyone knew each other. Martin's strange behavior quickly became the subject of gossip. Neighbors started avoiding contact, afraid their children might catch something from the sick child. The situation was made worse by the fact that Martin didn't look sick. He was a beautiful, physically healthy boy, and his inappropriate behavior seemed like the result of poor parenting. People openly expressed the opinion that the parents just didn't know how to handle their child. In 1965, my mother was born, and Martin became a real threat to the baby. The 3-year-old boy didn't understand that his sister was fragile and could accidentally hurt her. The last straw came when he hit the 1-year-old girl with a wooden toy, trying to make her stop crying. In 1967, when Martin was 5, Grandma placed him in a specialized institution. This decision came easier to her than to previous generations, because society already recognized the need for professional help for such children. It was believed he'd be better off in the institution than at home. My mother grew up knowing only the official version, that she'd had an older brother who died in childhood from a rare disease. Grandma carefully hid the truth, believing her daughter didn't need to know about the family curse. But when Mom got pregnant in 1989 and learned she was having a boy, Grandma was forced to reveal the family secret. By then, she was 49 and had lived her whole life in fear of the tragedy repeating. The story shocked Mom to her core. She realized she risked giving birth to the 4th generation of a sick boy. But in the late 1980s, abortions were available, and she seriously considered that option. However, religious beliefs and hope that modern medicine could help made her continue the pregnancy. My older brother Tommy was born in February 1990, right in the middle of the Reagan-era optimism. For the first months, Tommy seemed like a normal baby, and Mom hoped the family curse was finally over. But by 8 months, troubling signs became apparent. Tommy didn't respond to his name, didn't make eye contact, didn't reach for his parents. By his first birthday, the picture was clear. Tommy didn't speak, didn't play with toys, spent most of his time in his own world. But unlike previous generations of sick boys, he wasn't aggressive or destructive. His peculiarities showed up as complete detachment from the surrounding world. The pediatrician referred Tommy to a pediatric neurologist. But early 1990s medicine still knew little about autism spectrum disorders. The doctor gave a vague diagnosis of psychomotor developmental delay of unclear etiology and advised patience. By 18 months, it was clear Tommy needed special help. He wasn't developing like normal children, remaining at the level of a 1-year-old. But the worst was yet to come. When Tommy turned 2, he began having episodes of uncontrollable aggression. 2.5 years after Tommy's birth, in 1993, I was born. That's when the incident happened that became the last straw. I was only 3 months old and cried frequently at night, like all babies. The baby's crying clearly irritated Tommy, though most of the time he seemed indifferent to everything happening around him. One night, Mom stepped away to the bathroom for 5 minutes, leaving me in my crib next to Tommy's crib. When she returned, the 3-year-old boy had somehow gotten out of his crib, climbed into mine, and pressed a pillow to my face. He didn't understand what he was doing. He just wanted to stop the irritating sound. Mom got there in time, but I was already starting to turn blue from lack of oxygen. The doctor at the hospital said point blank that having such a child in the house was deadly dangerous for a baby. By then, public opinion about developmental disorders had become more enlightened. But the safety of healthy children remained the priority. In 1993, when Tommy was 3, Mom took him to a modern facility for children with severe developmental disorders. Unlike the grim institutions of the past, this was a specialized facility with qualified staff and individualized approaches to each child. Mom told everyone that her son died from a rare genetic disease. In the 1990s, this was a socially acceptable version that didn't raise unnecessary questions. The family received sympathy and support instead of judgment and gossip. I grew up not knowing about my older brother's existence. Mom never told me the truth, believing it would only cause unnecessary pain. Officially, our family never had boys, only healthy girls. When I got pregnant with Emma in 2010 and learned I was having a girl, Mom glowed with happiness. She enthusiastically prepared for her role as grandmother, bought toys, knitted booties. The birth of a healthy granddaughter confirmed for her that the nightmare was in the past. But now, in 2015, learning I was having a boy, Mom was terrified. All the old fears came back with double force. She was afraid history would repeat for the 5th time, that my son would be born with the same terrible condition that had destroyed the lives of 4 generations of men in our family. As she told me all this, Mom cried like I'd never seen her cry. She confessed that she'd been tormented by guilt her whole life for giving up Tommy. But back then, she'd had no choice. And now she was afraid I'd have to go through the same horror. I was shocked by what I heard. At 30, I learned I had an older brother whose existence I'd never suspected, and that my future son was threatened by a genetic condition that could make his life unbearable. For the next few days, I couldn't find peace. David tried to calm me down, saying these might just be family superstitions, but the descriptions of the sick boy's behavior were too specific and similar to each other to be made up. I spent sleepless nights on the internet, studying information about genetic diseases passed from mother to son that cause similar symptoms. Finally, I came across a description of Fragile X syndrome. The symptoms almost perfectly matched our family history: delayed speech development, autistic behavior, problems with social interaction. The genetic counselor I consulted listened carefully to the family history. Dr. Harris was an experienced specialist and immediately suspected Fragile X syndrome. Blood tests confirmed her suspicions. I was a carrier of the mutant gene. This meant my son had a 50% chance of being born with Fragile X syndrome. But Dr. Harris immediately reassured me. Modern medicine knows much more about this condition than even 20 years ago. It turned out that Fragile X syndrome was first described only in 1969, and genetic testing became available only in the early 1990s. This explained why previous generations of our family didn't know the true cause of the boy's condition. Most importantly, modern methods of early diagnosis and intervention can dramatically change the prognosis for children with this syndrome. With the right approach, such children can learn to speak, attend regular school, even live relatively independent lives. But I was tormented by another question. What happened to Tommy? Was my brother alive? How had his life turned out in the institution? Dr. Harris advised finding him, explaining that meeting him would help me better understand what to expect from my own child. The search for Tommy took several weeks. The data protection system for orphan children is very strict. But with help from social services, I managed to find out that Tommy was alive and under the care of a foster family in Portland. It turned out that at 18, he'd been transferred from the children's institution to group housing for adults with developmental disabilities. There he was noticed by Margaret Johnson, a social worker who decided to take him under her care. She had a son with autism herself and understood the peculiarities of such people. The first phone conversation with Margaret shocked me. She told me Tommy had been tormented his whole life by the question of why his birth mother abandoned him. He remembered Mom, remembered how she cried when they took him away. This was his most painful trauma. The meeting was arranged at a small cafe in Portland. I drove there with my heart pounding, not knowing what to expect. My ideas about Tommy, formed by Mom's stories, painted a picture of an unmanageable, unpredictable person. Reality turned out to be completely different. Tommy was a tall, thin 35-year-old man with my eyes and Dad's features. When I entered the cafe with Margaret, he was sitting at a table, nervously fidgeting with a napkin and avoiding eye contact. At the sight of a stranger, Tommy was clearly nervous. He started rocking from side to side, muttering something to himself. But when Margaret showed him my photo and explained I was his sister, then showed him an old photo of our mom, Tommy's face transformed. He took Mom's photo with trembling hands, studied it for a long time, then started repeating, "Mama, Mama, Mama." You could hear both joy and pain in his voice. It was clear he recognized the face and that this memory triggered strong emotions. Then he pointed at Mom's photo and at himself, slowly saying, "She mama." "Aye, son." And again, "Mama, mama." His speech was limited. He spoke in simple words and phrases, often repeating the same thing. But it was clear he understood the family connection between us. Margaret explained Tommy's peculiarities to me. He really did have a severe form of Fragile X syndrome. Speech was most affected. He could only express simple thoughts and needs. Abstract concepts were beyond him. But through years of special work, he'd learned a lot. Tommy could take care of himself, could do simple work, even build relationships with people. He worked in a sheltered workshop, making wooden items, birdhouses, shelves, toys. Working with wood calmed him and gave him a sense of achievement. Tommy lived in a special house with 5 other adults with various developmental disabilities. Each had their own room, with a shared kitchen and living room. Social workers were with them around the clock, helping with daily issues and monitoring safety. Tommy had a strict daily routine that helped him feel calm. Wake up at 7 a.m., breakfast, work in the workshop from 9 to 3, lunch, free time, dinner, TV, and sleep at 10 p.m. Any changes to the schedule caused him anxiety, but if introduced gradually, he could adapt. Most surprisingly, Tommy had a girlfriend. Sally lived in a neighboring house for people with developmental disabilities. She had Down syndrome, but was more social than Tommy. They met every weekend, went to movies, the park, cafes. Sally helped Tommy communicate with other people and cope with stress. Margaret told me that Tommy generally seemed like a happy person. Yes, he had serious limitations, but in the right environment, with understanding and support, he found his place in life. He didn't hurt anyone, was kind and responsive, loved helping other residents of the house. Jason, the head social worker who'd been supervising Tommy for 15 years, explained to me that modern methods could have dramatically changed my brother's life. If specialists had started working with him from birth, using early intervention techniques, he would have had much better chances of developing speech and social skills. In the 1990s, such programs practically didn't exist. Children with similar disorders were simply maintained, with no attempt to develop their abilities. Tommy ended up in the institution at 3, when the most important period for brain development had already passed. But even under those conditions, he'd managed to learn a lot. Organizing a meeting between Tommy and Mom became a real test for me. Mom categorically refused to go, saying she couldn't bear to see her son after 32 years of separation. She was sure Tommy hated her for abandoning him. But I insisted. I understood this meeting was necessary, not only for Tommy, but for Mom too. She needed to see that her son was alive, that he wasn't suffering, that her decision hadn't been a fatal mistake. The meeting took place at our house in January 2016. Mom was so nervous, I feared for her health. When Tommy entered the house with Margaret, he was initially confused. The setting was unfamiliar. There were many people, and changes always caused him stress. But when he saw Mom, something in him changed. She'd aged, of course, but something in her face. Her voice seemed familiar to him. He came closer, looked at her carefully, then quietly said, "Mama?" Mom couldn't hold back and broke down crying. Tommy got scared by her tears and started repeating, don't cry, Mama, don't cry." He awkwardly stroked her head, like he used to do as a child when trying to comfort her. This simple care, preserved in his memory for over 30 years, moved everyone present. Gradually, Tommy got comfortable in our house. Emma, who was 5 then, accepted Uncle Tommy with childlike directness. She showed him her toys, told him about kindergarten. Tommy listened attentively, though he didn't understand much, and responded with simple phrases. For Emma, Uncle Tommy was a revelation. She saw an adult who talked and behaved like a big child for the first time. But instead of fear or confusion, she showed amazing sensitivity. She intuitively understood that she needed to speak slowly and use simple words with Uncle, but she couldn't hug him too tight. That loud sound scared him. Tommy brought us gifts he'd made himself, a wooden jewelry box for Mom and a toy horse for Emma. The work was done carefully, with love. You could see he put his soul into each item. Over the remaining months of pregnancy, our family changed dramatically. Mom started meeting with Tommy regularly, gradually getting used to his peculiarities. They went to parks, cafes, museums. Mom was relearning how to be a mother to an adult son with special needs. Working with a family psychologist helped Mom deal with her guilt. The doctor explained that in the 1990s, she really had no other options. Back then, there was no support for families with special children, no inclusive education, no special programs. The decision to give up Tommy was forced and motivated by concern for the healthy child's safety. Meanwhile, I completely immersed myself in studying Fragile X syndrome and modern methods of helping such children. It turned out that in the last 25 years, there had been a real revolution in this field. Early diagnosis allows detection of the syndrome in the first months of life. Special early intervention programs help children develop speech, social skills, and learning ability. Modern medications ease symptoms of hyperactivity and anxiety. I met families raising children with Fragile X syndrome. Many of these children attended regular schools, had friends, participated in sports. Of course, they needed additional support, but their lives were dramatically different from the isolation in institutions that was the only option 25 years ago. Dr. Harris introduced me to a team of specialists who work with children with genetic developmental disorders. A pediatric neurologist, special education teacher, speech therapist, psychologist, all had experience working specifically with Fragile X syndrome. We made an action plan for the child's first years. If the diagnosis was confirmed, specialists would start working with him from the very first months. Early developmental stimulation, special exercises, games, music therapy, all this could help the child realize his potential to the maximum. David was initially skeptical about my activity. He thought I was preparing for the worst-case scenario too early, but gradually, seeing my determination and learning more about modern possibilities, he got involved in the preparation too. We redesigned the nursery, considering the child's possible special needs. We removed excess stimuli that might cause overstimulation, selected special toys for developing fine motor skills and tactile sensations. Emma enthusiastically prepared for her role as big sister. She studied books about children with special needs, learned to be patient and understanding. Uncle Tommy became an example for her that people with developmental disorders can be kind and loving. In March 2016, my son Lucas was born. Outwardly, he was a completely healthy baby, beautiful, active, with good reflexes, but I knew appearances could be deceiving. For the first months, I anxiously watched every stage of his development. At 3 months, genetic testing confirmed our worst fears and best hopes simultaneously. Lucas really did have Fragile X syndrome, but we were ready for it. From 4 months on, a team of specialists began working with Lucas. The child psychologist showed me special techniques for interacting with the baby that stimulate nervous system development. Simple games, massage, music, all this helped Lucas better perceive the world around him. At 6 months, a special education teacher joined the team. We started working on fine motor development, teaching Lucas to focus his gaze and track objects. Every small achievement was celebrated as a victory. The neurologist selected mild medication support for Lucas, B vitamins, drugs that improve nervous system function. Nothing heavy, but these medications helped his brain develop better. We went to a special pool for infants. Warm water and smooth movements calmed Lucas, while water exercises developed coordination and muscle tone. After each session, he slept more soundly and was calmer. I studied the principles of structured learning and created a developmental environment at home. Bright, contrasting pictures to stimulate vision, various textures for tactile development, classical music for hearing development. Emma turned out to be an excellent helper. She instinctively understood how to communicate with her little brother. She spoke to him slowly and clearly, showed him bright toys, sang lullabies. When Lucas cried or fussed, Emma could calm him better than adults. David mastered special techniques for playing with children with autistic traits. He learned to recognize signs of overstimulation in Lucas and redirect his attention to something calming in time. The results exceeded all our expectations. By 8 months, Lucas began responding to his name, turning his head to familiar voices. By a year, he learned to sit, clap his hands, point at things that interested him. At 18 months, Lucas said his first words, "Mama" and "Dada." For our family, this was a real triumph. Tommy, who was present at that moment, was as happy as if he'd learned to speak himself. By age 2, Lucas's vocabulary expanded to 30 words. He knew names of basic objects, could show body parts, understood simple instructions. Yes, his development was slower than normal children, but progress was obvious. At 2.5, Lucas began putting together simple puzzles, distinguishing colors and shapes. He learned to eat with a spoon, drink from a cup, play independently with toys. His favorite activity became building towers with blocks, which he could do for hours. Lucas had his peculiarities. He didn't like loud sounds, needed a clear daily routine, sometimes repeated words and phrases. But he was an affectionate, curious child who was happy with new discoveries and could express his emotions. By age 3, it was clear Lucas was ready to attend daycare. We chose a specialized facility that worked with children with developmental needs. There, they continued working with him on an individual program, gradually preparing him for integration into a regular group. Daycare adaptation went surprisingly smoothly. Lucas quickly got used to the new routine, made friends with several children. Teachers noted his kindness and responsiveness. He was always ready to share toys and help those who were crying. At 4, Lucas began speaking in simple sentences. His speech was slow. Sometimes he mixed up words, but he could express his needs and talk about what interested him. The speech therapist continued working with him on speech development, and progress was steady. Tommy became a regular guest in our house. Every weekend, he came to visit, spent time with his nephew and niece. For Lucas, Uncle became a special person. They understood each other without words. Tommy brought Lucas wooden toys he made himself. Cars, blocks, pyramids, all made with love and care. Lucas adored these gifts and could play with them for hours. Amazingly, Tommy turned out to be an excellent mentor for his nephew. He patiently showed him how to build with blocks, how to draw simple figures, how to care for plants. His calm and infinite patience had a soothing effect on Lucas. Mom completely reconciled with her past. Seeing how Lucas was growing and developing, she understood that 30 years ago, she really didn't have such opportunities. Modern medicine and education were working miracles that were unthinkable in the 1990s. At 5, Lucas went to regular daycare with an inclusive program. He had a tutor who helped him adapt to group activities, but he spent most of his time with regular children. Other parents were initially wary of Lucas, but children turned out to be much more tolerant. They quickly got used to his peculiarities and accepted him into their group. Lucas didn't hurt anyone, willingly shared toys, was a kind and responsive friend. At 6, Lucas began showing interest in music. We bought him a children's keyboard, and it turned out he had pitch and rhythm. Music became his passion. He could play simple melodies for hours, hum songs. The music teacher at daycare noted that Lucas had abilities. We signed him up for individual lessons, and he happily learned the basics of piano playing. At 7, Lucas started regular school. This was an important milestone. For the first time in our family's history, a boy with Fragile X syndrome got the opportunity to study with regular children. Lucas had an assistant who helped him cope with academic tasks. The program was adapted to his needs: more time for assignments, additional explanations, special teaching methods. Reading was difficult for Lucas, but he persistently mastered letters and syllables. Math went better. He counted well up to 20, solved simple problems. He liked music and art classes most. Classmates accepted Lucas warmly. The teacher had talked with the children about how all people are different, and that's normal. The kids turned out to be amazingly understanding. They helped Lucas when he couldn't manage, protected him from older kids' teasing. Emma, who was 12 by then, became a real protector of her little brother. When children or adults looked strangely at Lucas, she calmly explained that every person has their own special traits. Emma dreamed of becoming a special education teacher. The experience of living with a special brother showed her how important support and understanding are for people with developmental disabilities. She read books on special education, helped Lucas with homework, invented developmental games for him. At 8, Lucas was already reading simple texts, writing in print letters, solving problems up to 50. His speech became more connected, though he still spoke slower than peers and sometimes repeated phrases. Lucas made real friends at school. 3 boys from his class regularly came to visit us, played blocks with him, watched movies. They didn't notice his peculiarities or accepted them as normal. Lucas participated in school events alongside other children. At the New Year's party, he played keyboard while classmates sang. At the sports festival, he participated in relay races. Of course, he needed additional support, but he was a full member of the school community. Swimming became another passion for Lucas. In water, he felt confident. Movements were smooth and coordinated. We signed him up for a section for children with special needs, where he trained 3 times a week. Now, in 2025, Lucas is 9 years old, and he amazes everyone with his achievements. He not only studies in regular school, but has friends, hobbies, dreams about the future. He wants to work with wood, like Uncle Tommy, or become a musician. Of course, Lucas still has limitations. Abstract thinking is difficult for him. He slowly absorbs new information, needs extra time for assignments, but most importantly, he's a happy child who feels loved and accepted. Tommy is prouder of his nephew than anyone. Seeing Lucas's successes, he understands what opportunities he missed himself. But instead of bitterness, he feels joy for the boy. Lucas smart, he says simply. Lucas lucky. Emma is now 14 and firmly decided to become a special education teacher. She says Lucas taught her to understand that all people are different, and that's normal. When classmates sometimes look strangely at Lucas, she calmly explains to them that everyone has their own special traits. At 39, I feel ready for another child. David is 42, and we both understand that if we want a third child, now is the time. But this time, we decided to use modern technology. In vitro fertilization with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis allows choosing the healthy embryo. We can conceive a child who won't be a carrier of Fragile X syndrome. The IVF procedure was successful, and I'm now in my 7th month of pregnancy. Genetic tests confirmed that our third child, a boy, is completely healthy and not a carrier of the mutant gene. This doesn't mean we regret Lucas. On the contrary, he brought special joy to our family and taught us unconditional love. But now we have the choice that previous generations didn't have. Lucas is enthusiastically preparing for his role as big brother. He's helping prepare the nursery, choosing toys for his future brother, dreams of teaching him to play piano. Emma is also happy about the addition to the family and plans to be the best big sister to both brothers. Our family has become truly special. Soon we'll have 2 sons with different needs, a daughter who plans to devote her life to helping people with special needs, Uncle Tommy, who finally found a family. We've learned to accept differences and support each other. Our family's story completely changed over 10 years. What seemed like a curse turned out to be a genetic trait that you can not just live with, but be happy with. The scariest thing in our family history wasn't the syndrome itself, but the ignorance and fear of it. I often think about the women of previous generations. My great-great-grandmother, great-grandmother, grandmother, mother. They all did what they thought was right in their circumstances. In their times, there wasn't the knowledge, methods, or support available now. My great-great-grandmother in the 1920s lived in a world where such children were considered cursed. My great-grandmother in the 1940s faced medical ignorance and social ostracism. Grandmother in the 1960s got a more scientific approach, but still insufficient knowledge. Mom in the 1990s had access to diagnosis, but not effective help. Each generation did the best they could with available resources. They fought the unknown with the only methods available to them, trying to protect healthy children and preserve the family. But times have changed. Modern society is learning to accept people with special needs, creating opportunities for their development and self-realization. Inclusive education, supported employment, group housing, all this gives hope for a dignified life. The chain of fear and rejection that stretched through 4 generations is finally broken. Lucas is growing up in a family that understands his needs and is ready to support him. Tommy found a family that accepts him as he is. Future generations of our family will know the truth about their genetics. If any descendants have a child with Fragile X syndrome, they'll know it's not a death sentence, but a trait you can live a full life with. Family secrets only have destructive power when they remain in darkness. When brought to light, they lose power over people and often become sources of strength and understanding. Our family became stronger by learning our complete history. We learned to value differences, support each other, and believe that love and knowledge can overcome any genetic traits. Every day, seeing Lucas's smile when he plays piano, watching him prepare to become a big brother, listening to him talk about school friends, I know we made the right choice. Every weekend, when Uncle Tommy comes to us with new wooden toys, when he patiently plays with the children, when he hugs Mom and says, I love family, I know the family curse is defeated forever. The family curse turned out not to be a curse at all, but an opportunity to show what love can do when it combines with understanding, knowledge, and readiness to accept a person as they are. And most importantly, our story continues. Lucas is growing, developing, dreaming about the future. Soon his healthy brother will be born. Emma is preparing to help other families who will face similar challenges. Tommy finally feels needed and loved. We broke the chain of fear that bound 4 generations of women in our family. Now, instead of fear, we have hope. Instead of shame, pride. Instead of rejection, acceptance. This is a story about how a family secret that seemed like a curse became a blessing. About how knowledge and love can change fate. About how every person, regardless of their special needs, deserves love, understanding, and a chance at happiness. In February 2026, our healthy son will be born. Lucas has already chosen a name for him, Alex. He says he'll teach his little brother to play piano and build with blocks. Emma plans to help with care and upbringing. Tommy has already started making toys for the new nephew. Our family is living proof that love conquers fear, knowledge conquers ignorance, and acceptance conquers rejection. We turned a family curse into a family blessing, and this story will be passed down to future generations as an example that you should never give up. The mystery of the disappearing boys in our bloodline has been solved. They didn't disappear because they were cursed or unwanted. They disappeared because previous generations didn't have the tools, knowledge, or support systems we have today. But now, armed with understanding and surrounded by love, our boys can not only survive, they can thrive. Lucas will grow up knowing he's different, but never feeling less than. Alex will grow up understanding that differences make families stronger, not weaker. And Tommy, after 35 years, finally knows what it means to be truly accepted for exactly who he is. The chain is broken. The curse is lifted. And in its place stands something far more powerful. A family united by love, strengthened by truth, and committed to ensuring that no child in our lineage will ever again be lost to fear or misunderstanding.